Story 1. The move into 4B was quiet. Too quiet. The building, a squat brick monolith from the 1930s, seemed to absorb all sound. As soon as the movers left, the silence descended, heavy and textured, smelling faintly of old varnish and cedar dust. I noticed the architectural features immediately. They weren't charming quirks. They felt like deliberate, ugly mistakes. The hallway leading to the bedroom was disproportionately wide, and the linen closet was the worst offender. It was shallow on the right, barely able to hold towels, but the left side plunged deep into the wall, a poorly recessed nook that felt like an afterthought or a botched renovation. My flashlight beam vanished into the dusty corner every time I tried to clean it. They just built them weird back then, the superintendent had shrugged when I asked. But this wasn't just weird. It felt wrong, as if some space had been stolen or sealed off. The neighbors contributed to the unease. Across the hall lived Mrs. Petrov. I saw her only once, on my third day, standing motionless outside her door. She was small and impeccably dressed, her gray hair pinned tight. She didn't introduce herself. She simply watched as I struggled with a box of books. Her gaze was not curious or unfriendly, but utterly non-committal, like she was studying a stain on the carpet. When I finally said good morning, she turned slowly and disappeared without a word. The deeper I unpacked, the more 4B revealed its history. In the bedroom, hidden mostly by the rug, were 3 parallel gouges in the hardwood floor. They weren't scuff marks. They were deep, frantic scratches. They started near the window and terminated abruptly at the wall adjacent to that strange, deep portion of the linen closet. That section of wall looked slightly different. I pressed against it. It was solid, but the plasterwork was newer than the rest of the room, patched and painted over with a slightly flatter, more modern eggshell white. I started having small anxieties, the kind that settle in the gut first. Why did the scratches stop precisely there? Who had lived here before me? And what had they been trying to access, or perhaps keep away from? The silence of the building began to feel less like thick walls and more like mutual, enforced secrecy. I found myself listening late at night, not for noise, but for the absence of it. One evening, I put my ear directly to the patched wall. Nothing. Just the dull thrum of my own pulse. But when I stepped back, I realized the scent of cedar, which had been faint before, was now strong, medicinal, and overwhelming. I looked out into the hall. Mrs. Petrov's door was closed. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew exactly who I was and what this apartment was. She wasn't an unfriendly neighbor. She was a quiet, constant sentinel, ensuring that the occupants of 4B, past or present, remained exactly where they were placed. The architectural flaws weren't mistakes. They were boundaries, and I was living right up against a wall that had been sealed for a reason. I reached into the deep, dark pocket of the linen closet, past the dust, and my fingers brushed against something cold and rigid. The original structural back of the wall, set 3 feet deeper than it had any right to be. The current wall was merely a veneer, built recent enough to still smell faintly of drying paint, standing guard over the space that used to exist. Story 2. The relief of signing the lease for 402 was short-lived. The building, the Hawthorne, was a relic of cheap pre-war construction, all dingy marble and tired brass. I told myself the low rent was worth the smell of old varnish and pipe sweat. The apartment itself was a corridor of compromises. The kitchen barely fit one person, and the living room was dominated by an impossible architectural error. A narrow, shallow indentation set into the wall separating my unit from 401. It was too high for a shelf, too low for a window, and had been plastered over poorly years ago. You could still see the original seam where they tried to hide the mistake. My neighbor in 401 was a woman I only saw once, Mrs. Elms. She materialized outside my door as I was hauling the last box. She was frail, dressed in thick gray wool, and didn't introduce herself. She merely stood there, watching my key turn in the lock, her expression conveying a profound, weary disappointment, as if my moving in was a cruel joke played specifically on her. "He left quickly," she whispered, her voice like dry paper. Then she retreated into her unit without ever meeting my eyes. He. the previous tenant. I hadn't thought much about him, but now the apartment felt imbued with his hasty departure. I started unpacking in the spare bedroom, realizing the closet was abnormally deep, extending further back than the wall should allow. When I finally cleared out the cobwebs, I found the second architectural oddity, a small rectangular opening near the ceiling, covered not with glass, but with a sheet of corrugated tin screwed into the frame. It faced the wall of the neighboring unit. It was an internal peephole, or maybe a poorly sealed ventilation hatch that had been bricked up on the other side. The past tenant's presence solidified around that blocked window. Underneath it, where the floorboards met the wall, the wood was scarred, not from water damage or wear, but deliberate, concentrated scratching. Hundreds of faint, parallel gouges, as if someone had spent hours kneeling there, scraping at the polished floor with something dull and pointed. I cleaned the scratches, but couldn't scrub away the feeling of surveillance. The silence of the building was unnatural, a heavy soundproofing blanket that made every creak of my own floorboards sound like a gunshot. Then came the nights. I started sleeping in the living room, away from the closet. But the living room was where the plastered-over indentation was, and that's where the sound originated. It wasn't loud, just a regular, slow tick, like a clock mechanism failing, or condensation dripping onto metal. It seemed to come from inside the wall, right where the old seam was. I pressed my ear against the plaster one cold Tuesday night, trying to rationalize it as bad plumbing. The ticking stopped. Instead, there was a sound I could recognize. The slow, deliberate scraping of something against stone, moving from the floor up the wall on the other side. It stopped precisely at the height of the sealed indentation, and then a pause, followed by a light, rhythmic tapping, tapping, tapping on the inside of the plaster. It wasn't frantic or desperate. It felt planned. It felt like the previous tenant, whoever he was, didn't leave quickly enough. And Mrs. Elms wasn't disappointed in me. She was disappointed that someone else, me, was now standing where the tapping could reach. Story 3. The excitement of new beginnings lasted exactly 2 days. 2 days to unpack boxes, to ignore the musty scent that clung to the plaster, to tell myself the drafts were just old windows. Then the apartment started to make itself known. My super, Mr. Henderson, was a man carved from granite, offering only a grunt when he handed over the keys. "Top floor," he'd rumbled. "Quiet neighbors." He didn't mention the silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, expectant. The first oddity was the alcove in the living room. Too shallow for a bookshelf, too narrow for a chair. It was just a dark recess, always shadowed, no matter how bright the lighting. My cat, Midas, usually a fearless explorer, gave it a wide berth. He'd stare into it, hackles raised, then dart away. Then came Mrs. Albright from across the hall, an elderly woman with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. She'd intercepted me bringing up a box of books. "You're new," she'd stated, rather than asked. Her gaze drifted to my apartment door. "They never stay long, the ones in your unit. Always leave in a hurry." She didn't elaborate, just smiled a slow, unsettling smile, displaying too many teeth. Inside, the whispers began. Not actual voices, but a faint, rhythmic scratching from behind the bedroom wall, directly opposite the alcove. I tapped the wall, listened. Nothing. But when I lay in bed, the scratching would return, like fingernails tracing a pattern on the other side. Not a quick, frantic rodent sound, but almost deliberate. One morning, while cleaning out the kitchen cabinets, I found it. Taped to the very back of a shelf, hidden behind an old, faded contact paper lining, was a crayon drawing. A child's crude rendition of a house, but with faces in the windows. Small, round faces with enormous, hollow eyes. No names, no date. Just "Home" scrawled beneath it in shaky red letters. The house looked eerily like mine. The smell intensified too. That cloying, sweet scent. I'd blamed it on lingering air fresheners, then on the old building's pipes. But it came and went, strongest in the dead of night. like lilies left too long in a stuffy room. It wasn't coming from outside. It felt like it was seeping from the very walls. My sleep fragmented. I'd wake, not from a dream, but from the chilling sensation of being watched. My eyes would fly open, searching the darkened room, always landing on the alcove, just beyond my line of sight. It felt less like a recess in the wall and more like an open mouth. I started double-checking the locks before bed, then triple-checking. I found myself staring at the bricked-up fireplace in the living room, wondering if it had been sealed for warmth or for something else entirely. The silence of the apartment was no longer quiet. It was heavy with unseen presences, with the echoes of previous tenants who left in a hurry, with the slow, deliberate scratching behind my bedroom wall. Mrs. Albright was right. They never stay long. I can feel the apartment waiting, settling around me, a silent, patient predator. I haven't unpacked all my boxes. Part of me, a small, terrified part, believes that if I don't fully settle in, I can still leave. But I know, with a cold certainty that roots me to the spot, that the apartment won't let me go. Not now.